Revenge films.
My name is Ashley Smith. I'm a single 24-year-old working as an administrator in a small medium enterprise. I live at home with my family, with my father, my mother, and my grandmother. Our family gets along very well. I also have a younger brother named Steven, who is 3 years younger than me. He doesn't live at home with us right now because he's in college and living in the college dorms. Then one day, we got a phone call from my little brother, saying that he was struggling with his life at college, and he wanted to come back home. Our whole family was concerned, and we were all ears, wondering what happened to Steven. According to him, he was struggling with the meals. Even though his dorm provides meals for the students in the mornings and in the evenings, he said that the amount of each meal was so small that all of the students would have to steal from each other. And that was the standard. Because Steven had never been a very strong kid, he wasn't suited for that kind of situation. He said that every day his meals were being stolen from him, and he was having to go to college hungry every day, and that it was becoming unbearable. Ever since he was a little kid, my little brother was a crybaby and a little bit spoiled. He was the type to be teased by his friends and bullied at school. And that brother of mine was going through the same experience in his college dorms. I did feel a little bit bad that because of this, he was having to go hungry every day. That being said, his college campus was over an hour away by train from our family home. The family was worried that it would be too much for him to commute to college from home, and we weren't sure what to do. However, even still, Steven said that he wanted to come and move back in at home, and we didn't stop him. Unfortunately, when my brother came back home, everything fell apart. The peaceful life that we had instantly came crumbling down. When my little brother came back from living at the dorms, he had become a different person. We were shocked at how greedy he was when it came to food. As he would walk in the door, he would say,
"I'm hungry. Is there anything in the fridge?"
He would head straight for the kitchen and open up the fridge. He would grab whatever he could get his hands on, from chicken to sausages, and immediately start scarfing it all down. After emptying the fridge, it still wasn't enough for him, and he would take snacks and juice into his room. Those would also disappear in an instant. Seeing my little brother act like this, our entire family was shocked and didn't know what to do. In the beginning, we thought that he must be hungry after starving in the college dorms for so long, so most of us turned a blind eye and let it happen. However, every single day after that, he continued this greedy behavior. He started eating off the plates of the other family members, and I started to become irritated with him. Even though I had bought a dessert for myself to eat and I wrote my name on it just in case when I placed it in the fridge, that wasn't enough. Steven ate it without even asking me, and we started getting into more fights by the day. As soon as it would become time for dinner, my little brother would come rushing home and run into the door. And then he would start putting his hands on the food that was meant for the rest of the family, and I was no longer able to turn away and started scolding him. However, even when I scolded him and raised my voice at him not to eat the food that was meant for others, my little brother refused to listen and would yell back at me. He would say,
"What's the big deal? I'm starving. Let me eat."
And he would continue eating off our plates. Not only that, but when my little brother moved back into the family home, he said that he would contribute to the household expenses, and yet, all of the money that he earned from his part-time job, he was spending on messing around with his friends, and he didn't even try to put a penny into the family. Because of my little brother, we were starting to have to spend double the amount on food, expenses, and my parents were at their wits' end. Everybody in the family was starting to be fed up with living with my little brother, and eventually, my father lost his temper. He was furious and sat my brother down for a lecture.
"Listen, Steven, if you're not able to consider those around you and stop being so greedy, we're not going to be able to be with you anymore."
However, instead of listening, Steven instead blew his temper back at our dad.
"This is just as much my house as it is your house. What's so wrong with eating as much as I want whenever I want?
When he yelled that, he turned around and headed towards the family altar, and he started eating the food offerings that were on the altar, even though my father was yelling at him.
Stop that right now, Stephen! Stop it!
My brother didn't even try to stop his actions. When I tried to help my father and tell him to stop, this time Stephen turned to me and said,
Women shouldn't be eating food anyway, you fat pig!
He said such shocking words that it made me wonder if I was hearing things. His words were so immature that I was at a complete loss for words. As I stood there, stunned during that time, my brother searched every corner of the house and ate everything that he could get his hands on. That night, we decided to have a family meeting without my little brother. The four of us sat around the table and discussed what to do. My parents and I agreed on what we thought was the only option: to kick my brother out of the house. However, my grandmother disagreed. She was the only one to say we should continue to keep an eye on him, but let him stay. Her reasoning was that my little brother was never that greedy in the past, and that there were plenty of other ways to make him understand without having to kick him out immediately. She didn't want to send him back to the college dorms and make him starve, so the rest of us agreed, but we couldn't allow him to continue behaving in this way. And so the four of us decided to come up with a plan to teach my brother a lesson. First, we purchased a locked place on the fridge. Everybody besides my brother was given the code to the lock. When Stephen realized that he was no longer able to rummage through the fridge, he was furious. However, we ignored his tantrums and we moved on to the next strategy. Up until now, my mother and I had been working together to cook dinner for the whole family every day. But on this occasion, we decided to stop doing that and instead go out to eat together as a family without my brother. When it became dinner time, my brother rushed home, but he arrived to an empty house. As usual, he tried to look for any food that he could get his hands on. But you remember that he had already eaten everything, including the offerings that were on the altar, of course, so there was nothing left in the house that he could eat. After the four of us came home from having dinner outside, my little brother started to furiously yell at us.
Hey, where the hell is my food?
Stephen started throwing a tantrum at us, but I replied to him, "How about you figure it out yourself? You're not a child anymore, you're an adult." When I said that, he punched a hole in the wall and stormed out of the house. As days like this continued, finally, the incident occurred that broke the straw on the camel's back. One day, my grandmother noticed that $200 was missing from her wallet. In the beginning, I suspected my brother was behind this, but even though he was guilty about food, I didn't think that he would take it so far as to steal money from our grandmother. After discussing it with my parents, in the end, we decided that we should go to the police about it. As we were talking about the situation at the dining table, right at that time, my little brother came home. When he realized that we were trying to go to the police about the missing cash from my grandma's wallet, suddenly my brother started to panic. At that moment, I knew for certain that my brother was in fact the person who took the money, and I felt so upset about it that I became sad. It seemed that my parents felt the same way as me. When I looked over at my mother, she had tears in her eyes. I didn't have any energy left to be angry anymore, so I just quietly said to him, "Get out of this house, Stephen. Now." But in response, Stephen started yelling again.
This is all because you guys ignored me and went out to eat without me. This is all your fault. At this point, you're just bullying me.
Not only was he not apologizing, he started blaming the rest of the family, and we had all had enough. When my father started to lecture him once again about his greed with food, and how he even stole from his own grandmother, this time Stephen said,
When it comes to food, it's survival of the fittest. It's the same with money. That's Grandma's fault for being weaker than me.
When he said that, my grandma, who had been quiet this entire time, finally opened her mouth. What happened to you? When did you become like this? Even though you used to be such a sweet boy back then." My grandma said that under her breath, and we all saw a tear fall down her cheek. To follow up with her, my mother said, "Ever since you came home, your grandma told me to make you your favorite stew, and a lot of it, because she was so excited that you were going to be coming home to us. And yet, look at you." As she said that, she looked down with sadness. Looking at the two of them, Stephen went quiet. I was wondering what he was thinking. But then he suddenly ran out of the house and disappeared somewhere. I tried my best to cheer up my mother and grandmother, and then I went into the kitchen and unlocked the fridge and made a quick dinner with whatever I could find. The four of us sat and had dinner together. This was our first dinner at home for the first time in a while, and it was delicious. But nobody in the family was smiling. The next day at dinner time, Stephen came home as usual. However, this time he wasn't empty-handed. In both hands, he had bags full of delivery food. And then with tears in his eyes, he walked over to our grandma and handed her $200 and said,
"I'm so sorry, Grandma."
But much to our surprise, my grandmother didn't accept the money. Instead, she said, "You need to get out of this house, Stephen." That was all she said to him. Both of my parents were in agreement, but then Stephen started crying. He started talking about how he was never able to eat much in the dorms, and that he knew it was wrong for him to be spending his money on hanging out with friends instead of contributing to the family. He opened up that he didn't know what to do with himself. But my parents were having none of it. They said that he can't be so spoiled, and that he thinks that he can get away with things like that. It's not going to pass as an adult. And they kicked him out of the house. Stephen was sobbing at this point, and he seems to really regret his actions. Seeing Stephen crying like this, I was reminded of the little crybaby that my brother always was, and I couldn't just stand by and watch, so I tried to say, "Well, Stephen bought all this food anyway, so for tonight, why don't we at least eat it and have dinner together?" When I said that, finally there were smiles back on everybody's faces. That evening, I forgot about my anger towards my brother, and for the first time in a long time, we enjoyed a family dinner together. And perhaps he finally understood, because this time my brother didn't try to touch anybody else's food. After that, Stephen did, in fact, move out of the house and go back to the dorms. He was given many stern warnings from our father not to spend all of his money on hanging out with friends. And Stephen promised to rethink his lifestyle and get himself back on track. 1 year later, my little brother successfully graduated from college and managed to secure a job. Once he moved out of the dorms and began living by himself, my brother became so mature that I almost thought he was a different person. Every now and then he comes back to the family house to visit, but he was clearly no longer so greedy about food anymore, and I was so relieved. On the day when my brother saw his mother and grandmother crying, he must have had a change of heart. The way that he values money also changed, and he seems to also be able to be more considerate of those around him. And perhaps, as an apology for how much trouble he caused us back then, every single time he comes to the family house, he always brings delicious food and snacks for us. And I started to look forward to his visits. After everything that happened, I'm just glad that my brother truly changed for the better. All I can do is pray that he'll never go back to being so greedy ever again.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.